What if the entire global economy isn't actually that different from a giant pyramid scheme? I'm not talking about shady telegram scams or people promising to 10 times your money in 1 month. I'm talking about the money in your pocket, the mortgage you're paying, the savings you've built, your pension contributions. All of these sit inside a system that only works as long as new people, new debt, and new belief keep flowing in from the bottom. It sounds exaggerated, I know, but stay with me, because once you see the structure, you can't unsee it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If this system has survived until today, it's not because it's perfect. It's because governments, banks, and central banks constantly pump in new credit, new debt, and new illusions. So the main question is not, will this system collapse? The real question is, when it breaks, who will be standing at the bottom, holding everything up? Let's start simple. A pyramid scheme promises people high returns, but underneath, it doesn't create real value. Earlier participants are paid with the money of new participants. That's the entire trick. Charles Ponzi made this model famous in the 1920s. He promised a 50% return in just 90 days, and at first he really did pay people, using the money of those who joined later. That created the illusion that the system worked. People poured money in, but math is brutal. Each new layer needs more people than the one before. In a finite world, that structure always reaches its limit. So why do all pyramid schemes collapse? Because they demand infinite growth in a finite world. Eventually, you simply run out of new believers. The base stops expanding and the whole thing starts to crack. And here's the disturbing part. When you strip away the labels and the legal wrappers, a lot of what we call the modern economy begins to rhyme with that exact pattern. Most of us are never really taught how money is actually created. When you deposit $1,000 into a bank, it doesn't just sit quietly in a vault. Under fractional reserve banking, the bank keeps a small fraction, maybe 10%, and lends out the rest. That loan becomes someone else's deposit. Then, part of that new deposit is lent out again. From one original $1,000 deposit, the system can create several $1,000s of new credit. On paper, everyone looks richer. In reality, it's layer upon layer of claims stacked on a very small base, like a pyramid. This only works as long as people trust the system and don't all ask for their money back at the same time. After the Second World War, the world ran on the Bretton Woods system. Currencies were tied to the US dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. In 1971, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window. The link to gold was broken. From that moment on, the global economy ran on fiat money, currency backed not by metal, but by governments and collective belief. And belief is fragile. To keep the machine running, governments had to sell one idea over and over again. Growth will continue forever. Now let's move to something personal, retirement. Your pension or Social Security doesn't sit in a vault with your name on it. Most of the time, it's paid from the contributions of people who are working right now. This only works if the base of the pyramid is wide, many young workers supporting fewer retirees. But in countries like Japan, Italy, much of Europe, and increasingly the United States, populations are aging and birth rates are falling. Fewer young people, more retirees. The base shrinks while the top gets heavier. Economically, that's a pyramid shape whose math eventually stops working. For years, housing prices have been driven not just by what a home is truly worth, but by how much the next buyer can be pushed to pay, with borrowed money. Every housing boom feeds on new entrants at the bottom. When wages can't keep up and interest rates rise, the base stops growing, and the illusion starts to crack. Suddenly, the wealth people thought they had can evaporate, not because their house disappeared, but because the story around its price collapsed. The same logic appears in financial markets and in crypto. Stocks and coins often rise not only on real value, but on the belief that someone else will pay more tomorrow. When the system starts to shake, the real master of the pyramid steps in, the central bank. In 2008, when the housing pyramid cracked, central banks around the world printed trillions. They called it quantitative easing. In simple terms, new money was created to plug the holes, prop up asset prices, and keep banks and markets alive. Old debts were covered with new money. The losses were spread across society through inflation, low interest on savings, and austerity, while much of the profit stayed in private hands. The pyramid didn't fall. it was rebuilt, bigger than before. Today, global debt is measured in the hundreds of trillions, several times larger than the entire world's yearly economic output. If everyone on Earth worked for years just to pay off existing debt, we would barely get back to zero. Yet the official answer is always the same: more growth, more debt, more stimulus. This is where inflation quietly enters. Inflation isn't just prices going up a bit. It's the system's way of taking a slice of your purchasing power every year to keep the pyramid alive. Demographics are turning against the system as well. People live longer, fewer children are born, and in some countries, more adult diapers are sold than baby diapers. Pension systems were built for a world with many young workers and fewer retirees. When that flips, the structure becomes unstable. And in any pyramid-like structure, the biggest winners sit near the top. Banks collecting interest on money created from nothing, corporations using debt to pump up stock prices, politicians making promises they know someone else will have to pay for later. At the bottom, you find the saver, the worker, the latecomer, the person who still believes the system was designed for their benefit. So what do we do with all of this? First, we accept that the system was not designed for your benefit. Its first instinct is to protect itself. Inflation, debt, and bailouts are not bugs. They're features of how it survives. Second, we remember that real wealth doesn't live only in the system's promises. It lives in skills that no crisis can erase, in networks and relationships, in tangible assets and diversified investments that don't vanish when confidence does. And finally, financial freedom doesn't come from waiting for a government or a central bank to save you. It comes from understanding how the structure works, so you can step at least one move outside its traps. If this gave you even a small new way of seeing the world, you're in the right place. Because history doesn't just tell us what happened, it shows us what keeps happening. And here, on Minted Histories, we'll keep digging into the past to understand the system you're standing in today. As populations age, the very base of our economic pyramid begins to shrink. In countries like Japan, Italy, and much of Europe, you now see a quiet symbol of this shift. More adult diapers being sold than baby diapers. It's a simple detail, but it tells a brutal story. There are fewer new workers coming in at the bottom to support those at the top. Pension systems, healthcare, and social security were all designed for a world that no longer exists. When the demographic base erodes, the promises piled on top become harder and harder to keep. And in a structure that already behaves like a pyramid, that is more than a statistic. It's a ticking clock. In any pyramid-like system, the pattern of winners and losers is painfully familiar. At the top sit the institutions that create and control credit. Banks, large corporations, financial elites, and the politicians who align with them. They have first access to new money, first access to bailouts, and first access to information. By the time the effects reach the middle and the bottom, the gains have often been skimmed off, while the risks and the costs have been pushed downward. The saver who did everything right, the worker who traded time for a paycheck, the small investor who came in late, they are the ones left holding assets that can deflate and cash that silently loses power. In a structure like this, the question is not just who profits, but at whose expense. If the system itself behaves like a pyramid, then real wealth has to live at least partly outside its most fragile layers. Real wealth is the skill you can trade in any country, in any currency, even when markets are closed. It's the network of people you can call when everything feels uncertain. It's ownership of assets that don't vanish the moment trust in the system cracks. Things that have value even without a rising chart. You don't have to abandon the financial system, but you also don't have to stand blindly at the bottom of it. Understanding how it works gives you the power to step sideways, diversify your bets, and build a life that doesn't depend on endless expansion. So the point of this story is not to scare you. It's to give you a clearer map of the terrain you're already standing on. The global economy may not be a pyramid scheme by law, but structurally it rhymes with one, and that rhyme matters for your future. Once you see the layers, the incentives, and the way debt, inflation, and demographics interact, you're no longer just a passive piece at the bottom. You become someone who can choose differently, prepare differently, and think beyond the next headline. If this changed the way you look at money and history, you're exactly where you need to be. Stay with me here on Minted Histories, and we'll keep using the past to decode the system you're living in right now.